Thank you so much, everybody, for coming here today. I'm really excited to talk to you a bit about what I've learned about Agile practices as applied to the academic laboratory. I've been working on this project for my master's thesis for about a year or so. I think I did my kickoff last December, and I've learned a lot, and I'm excited to share it with you, my fellow Brodies. So I'm going to cover 4 things in my presentation today. I'm going to start with a little bit about my Broad journey and how I came to be standing here in front of you today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is Agile, this buzzword you might have heard around the Broad and around the tech community. What does that actually mean? I want to talk to you a bit about the Agile practices that have been applied here at the Broad and different challenges teams have faced or different ways teams have found that they can apply these methods. And finally, I'm going to give you a little information on where do you start? So you hear all this information, where's a good place to jump in and to try some things out? So with that, a little bit about my Broad journey. So I came to the Broad in 2013 as a research associate with the genomics platform. This was my first exposure to genomic sequencing ever, and it was just absolutely fascinating. I was infatuated with the Broad Institute culture and the progressive nature of the sciences and how fast things were moving. And what also captivated me at the genomics platform was the attention to lean process improvement. So here you see a 5S laboratory cart, which I helped the laboratory implement at that time. And while this seems like a simple thing of rearranging some things and taping out places for things to go, these small changes were really impactful for allowing us to load 30 sequencers in an hour. So this was my first real exposure to process improvement, and I found that really interesting. After being with the genomics platform for a few years, I found myself interested in learning more about what's happening on the upstream side of research, so what happens in the more academic setting in the labs. And it was that in 2015 that brought me to the Sibeti laboratory, and this was an absolutely incredible experience. I talk about mission-driven work. The Sibeti lab does an incredible amount of research in the viral genomic spectrum, looking at outbreak response, viral surveillance during an outbreak, and this mission really spoke to me. I had never worked in a place where it felt like my efforts mattered so much. And while I found the research fascinating, I also found myself drifting towards, again, the process improvement side of things. Like, we were doing such impactful research, and I was working with some of the most brilliant minds I've ever met. And yet there were still small process inefficiencies that I felt could advance us and could keep us going. And it was in these efforts that brought me to Tufts in pursuit of a master's in engineering management. There's a lot of pressure in the sciences for advanced education, and I knew that for me, research was not where I wanted to go, so I looked into the MSEM, which is essentially an MBA for technology. And my exploration through classes led me to meet Broad Institute's Agile coach, Didi Vaz, to learn about Agile practices. And this was the first I had ever heard of these things. And in hearing about Agile practices, I'll tell you more in a minute, there are so many applications that I saw where I was in the laboratory with my laboratory colleagues. And so it was that decision that led me to join the data sciences platform as a Scrum Master just about 2 years ago now to really dive into what it meant to carry out Agile practices, to learn them firsthand. And as well as to learn from the mentorship of Didi, who has been a wonderful, wonderful mentor. But I haven't forgotten about my ties to the laboratory. In September of 2016, I believe it was, Didi and I co-founded the Agile Academia Affinity Group. And this group has been going for just over 2 years and has grown to just under 100 members in that time. And this group really focuses on how Agile practices can be applied in the laboratory setting, in any other setting besides software. This is a discussion-based group. We had our first poster at the Broad Retreat last year, and it was selected out of all of the Broad Institute posters as one of the top 10 most informational selections, which is something to say at a scientific research institution. So I've channeled this energy and this momentum in learning about and observing how Agile practices can benefit the scientific space. And I've put this all together in a master's presentation, which I am here today sharing with you. So that's me. Nice to meet you all who I haven't. I would love to talk to you after this if you want to say hi. So anyway, part 2 of my presentation. What is Agile? Now, this can sound very complicated, and I tried to choose one of the most complicated pictures to demonstrate agility that I could possibly find. For everyone, this is the subway map of Agile practices. There are a lot of things on here, a lot of things that I don't even understand, because Agile practices, when you hear about Agile software development, it can be a little overwhelming. You see a lot of these big words here, like manifesto and Scrum and Kanban. Like, what do these things mean? And when you think about it, ultimately, Agile practices embody the 4 Agile values, which are individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. So all of these things here serve to support these 4 values here. And ultimately, you can boil these further down into 3 characteristics fostered within teams: communication, transparency, and continuous improvement. Notice that nowhere does this say software specifically, because the Agile values support high-performing teams. And on typical Agile software teams, they're characterized by things like continuous delivery, multi-directional feedback, customer collaboration, commitment to mission, all of these values which combine to enhance the Agile characteristics and keep the teams going faster. So again, it's not about software. Agile practices support high-performing teams. Any questions there? Is that clear? Awesome, I see some nods. So now that I've told you a little bit about the values, I want to tell you about some Agile practices which support these values that have been used in the laboratory setting. And to do this, remember these, I'm going to go through each of the 3 characteristics seen on an Agile team and tell you a little bit about some tools which can support those within your own group. Starting with communication. So some communication challenges in the lab. Does anyone want to shout out, are there any communication challenges that your group faces? I have examples if you don't have any. So things I remember from my times in all laboratories, no one in specific. I never know what's going on. Has anybody done this before? Who else can help me with this? Often in these settings, there are so many projects happening at any one time that coordination is really, really hard. So with that, I'd like to introduce the daily stand-up. So the daily stand-up is a 10 to 15-minute check-in meeting designed to expose impediments which are blocking a team's success. This meeting is intended to identify problems and not to solve them. So the idea is you're getting your team together, you're hearing a bit about what's going on, you're identifying blockers, and then you're finding solution to those immediately following the meeting, or having your conversations to solve those problems, not in a space when you have the whole team gathered. And so stand-up meetings typically focus around 3 questions. You've got, what did I do for the team yesterday? What am I doing for the team today? And is there anything that can help me go faster? And these meetings are typically facilitated by a servant leader to the team. In the software world, it's a role called the Scrum Master. You don't have a Scrum Master in the lab, so any neutral facilitator will do. And by going through these 3 questions, you're identifying impediments to your team or project success and identifying how you can accelerate things. And stand-up meetings can be customized. So in the software world, imagine that each of these orange dots here is a daily stand-up. So in the software world, you meet every day. Typically, most of my teams start out their day with these daily check-ins. But this can be changed to suit your group. So say you're in a project-based laboratory. Perhaps for the first few weeks of the project, as you're really ramping up sample sequencing and things are a little more hectic, you're meeting every day to touch base to make sure that you're talking about things like, is our sample quality there? What are next steps that we need to do to keep the sequencing going? How can we proceed here? But then maybe a few weeks in, you're doing long sequencing runs, you're doing long analysis pipelines, and you don't necessarily need to meet as often. So don't. And then finally, in the later stage of a project, when, say, you're writing or you're doing a lot more collaboration to wrap things up, perhaps then you do need the more frequent check-ins and you can adjust your cadence accordingly. Alternatively, if you work in a process-based laboratory, often laboratory processes span out over a couple days, and it can be inefficient to meet every day for the daily stand-up because not much has changed. So in that case, don't meet every day. Meet twice a week, meet 3 times a week, meet once a week. In these cases, you can expect to meet a little bit longer for each of those because you haven't been talking as much and there might be more questions or more obstacles to get over, but customize it. Play around with what's going to work best for your particular team, your particular project, and your particular organization. So the second tool I'd like to tell you about to enhance communication within a group are communities of practice. So a community of practice gathers individuals of the same role together for the exchange of ideas, support, and knowledge based around their role instead of their research. So what does this mean? Well, we all know that laboratories often have multiple projects. There are a lot of things going on at once. So you have your research focus here with a couple different questions or projects and different people assigned to each of those, and then you get a new postdoc who brings in a new project and some grad students who spin off of others. There's a lot going on, and often a PI or project manager in the lab has to know about everything, and it gets a little bit overwhelming. So the idea behind the community of practice is to help support individuals in their role-based challenges. So in this case, you might gather all of the students within the laboratory together to meet on a regular basis, or all of the staff scientists together. And in this case, you can receive mentorship from a group leader or a group manager, say a PI or a laboratory manager, but you're also building peer-to-peer communication and peer-to-peer mentoring and support. And you're offering a forum for those individuals to talk about, say, the experience of being a student or the experience of being a computational biologist. And in doing those things, you're supplementing the fact that you can't have one-on-one time with a PI every single day. And so this increases peer-to-peer communication within different groups. Any questions on those two things? I'll take questions at the end too. So that was a little bit about stand-ups and communities of practice. Cool. So next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about transparency. So again, thinking back to some of my laboratory experiences, things I remember, challenges around transparency. Are they still working on that? Or these project check-in meetings take forever when you're trying to talk about all of the projects happening at any one time. There's a lot to go through. And additionally, again, has anyone done this already? Like, where are things at? Where is this work at? I need to update our grant sponsor or what have you. So the first tool I'd like to talk to you about in this case are visual workboards. So a visual workboard is a centralized display of information which acts as an indicator of what projects or tasks are in flight, who is working on them, and what phase of the process they're in. Pretty straightforward. And so I want to introduce to you the basic Kanban board. So the word Kanban literally means board in Japanese. This is a principle that grew out of lean manufacturing practices. And the basic Kanban board is very simple. It has 3 columns: to do, in progress, and done. And the idea here is that in your team or project, your to-do column is ranked by priority. So the thing way at the top of the column is the thing that the next person in your group should touch. When they're going to jump into another task, that is what either the group has decided is the #1 priority or the project manager, but everyone's at consensus that this one, in this case task 3, is the next thing you jump into. And the other cool thing about Kanban boards is in true Kanban, you can implement what's called a work in progress limit. So in this example, I've added the number 2 after in progress, meaning that this group, in this example, has agreed to only have 2 things in progress at any one time. And you see they've literally marked in red that if a 3rd thing happens, the team needs to stop and talk about that. And the idea here is that you're not only starting work, but you're finishing work. So that if someone's ready to take on another task, is there something blocking the things that are already in progress and that is preventing them from continuing? And this is just the example. You can set work in progress limits based on whatever is going to work best for your team. But again, the idea here is having the conversation around why can't this thing in progress keep moving? And in that case, perhaps that's a place for the project manager or the laboratory manager to focus their efforts on removing that obstacle. But the cool thing about work boards is you can customize them however you like. So I put an example here of a work board potentially customized to a sequencing workflow, but you can do it whatever is going to work for your group. One group here at the Broad has gone through maybe 4 iterations of their work boards so far, and they keep changing them to serve both the team and both the leadership of their group. Boards can be digital or physical. With physical boards, you get the tactile satisfaction of moving something, and moving a sticky note to done is surprisingly satisfying for those who have not done it. And digital boards are unique in their own way in that there's a lot more information you can track on a digital board. So I made an example here. This is a Trello board. Trello is free digital work tracking software, and these boards can tell you a lot. So I've planted a couple of errors here on this board. I don't know if anyone can spot them, but I will point them out to you now. So this board has a heads-up column, and this is really handy because it immediately identifies if anything's in that heads-up column, someone needs to follow up on that, generally leadership of an organization. And the cool thing about digital boards is you can set this up so that if any member of your team puts something in that column, you get an email, you get an alert. You know right away that something's wrong and that that's where you should focus your efforts on unblocking the team. The other cool thing about digital boards is you can add a lot more details to each of these tasks. So say, for example, in this case, our LT lab technician is starting on a project which is not due until November 30th. And so you can ask the question of the group, what made this person pick up this task instead of what was due on the 31st? Is there a reason that the top of the to-do column is not able to be worked on? Why is this starting? Maybe we should reassess where we're focusing our efforts to make sure we get the right project done on time. And most importantly with work boards is to inspect and adapt. These should be changing, and these should serve to help the team themselves. It's great to use a work board to help inform leadership, but you want to make sure that your team is going to be able to maintain this board. Yeah, it might add a little bit of work, but it should be helping you more than it harms you. I had a conversation with a project manager throughout my project who was saying oh yeah, we tried a physical work board, but it never worked. My team didn't want to update the work board and Jira. Of course, you're adding more work for your team. So really consider what's going to work best for them, because ultimately, if the work board serves the team, it's going to serve those that are trying to organize and lead the team as well. Cool. So that's about digital work boards. I also wanted to talk a little bit about holistic values and prioritization as tools which increase transparency in the laboratory setting. So holistic values and priorities facilitate team autonomy by establishing what's most important to be working on at any given time. And I'll go through each of these. So starting with establishing group values. This is something that I've noticed not as many groups around here do, but I feel like is very impactful for the teams working in these groups. So let's say we have an example organization with these established values. So number 1, we're going to train great scientists. Number 2, we're going to quickly publish new insights. And number 3, we're going to enhance the global understanding of disease. The values of your group should motivate your team members. Have them involved when you're establishing these. These are things that you want to be proud to be upholding as a member of the team. And in this setting, when, say, one of your scientists said, I have a choice on what to do. Do I finish analyzing my results, or do I help out my graduate student? It's going to be immediately clear based on your lab values of where that person should direct their work. What is more important? If quickly publish new insights is your number 1 value, that's okay, but that means that maybe the scientist should finish her analysis before she changes her thought process and works with the student. So it really depends on the group, but these really align the laboratory to a mission. As far as group priorities go, this is a little different, and this might be where it gets contentious, but I welcome that. So Establishing group priorities is more on a project basis. And what this does is basically, in our example, it would say which one project at any given time is most important to complete. So say in the academic setting, perhaps your PI says Project Orange's deadline is in 2 weeks. That is our #1 priority right now. The rest of the lab might not necessarily have to stop their work, but they should be doing everything they can to support Project Orange in meeting that deadline, in getting their high-quality analysis completed, and in getting their work done. And what this does is this causes a shift in mindset. So you're going from me to we. It's not like your independent project within the group is important, but another project's success is also a success for the laboratory, and therefore a personal success for you as well. And by fostering this group mindset, you're making sure that no scientist is left alone. You won't have a graduate student working like 80-hour work weeks the week or two before their final deliverable, because they'll have a support system and they'll know that it's okay to ask for help, because at this point, like, my project is the highest priority. So that's the idea behind establishing holistic priorities and values. So the final characteristic I want to talk to you about on Agile teams is the idea of continuous improvement. And so there are 2 ways to look at this. The first I want to tell you a little bit about is the concept of an iteration review. So iteration reviews are regularly scheduled reviews of work done over a specific iteration with emphasis on demonstrating the most value possible for peer and stakeholder feedback. Cool. So what does this mean? So say we look at the scientific writing process, and you've got on the left side here the process of establishing your hypothesis all the way down through writing, editing, and publishing. I'm sure I've missed some stuff, but I tried to do a high level here. And there are varying levels of feedback throughout this process, depending on which group you're in. So perhaps as you're writing your hypothesis, you're getting a lot of feedback, you're really talking through the ideas and designing your experimental plan. But then as you're going through your experiment and analysis, maybe there's not as much attention to that. You're getting feedback, but you're not getting as much, until finally, when you get to the end of your project, you're really, okay, things are ramping up now, like, let's get more feedback, we have to get this paper out. I would argue that by doing specific iteration reviews throughout the duration of the project, you're going to know sooner whether or not you're headed in a right direction, and you can course correct earlier to get yourself to a stronger deliverable. So in this case, say every 3 weeks or so, having a specified check-in where individuals working on a project know that they have to deliver and present the most value that they've provided so far. And this type of feedback all along the way can lead to entirely eliminated experiments. If you don't need them, why do them? And in this case, you can save time, you can save money and funding, and you can ultimately get to your final deliverable faster. The second aspect and practice to foster continuous improvement is the retrospective meeting. Retrospective meetings are recurring meetings just specifically focused on team or organizational improvement. These are my favorite meetings. Yes, I have a favorite meeting. And I like retros because they're all framed around what's known as the prime directive, and I've listed it here. Regardless of what we discover, we understand and truly believe that everyone did the best job they could, given what was known at the time, their skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at hand. Retrospective meetings are not a time to point fingers at one another and tear each other down. They're not a time to say, well, so-and-so dropped this particular task and it never got done, and now we're late on this deadline. Well, it's the team's responsibility to get that thing done, so what could the team have better done in that situation to know sooner that this thing wouldn't have been done? So most retros are focused around 2 questions. You've got what is going well and what would we like to change. And retros follow a fairly simple format. So you start a retro by setting the scene, so perhaps reflecting on the last time period you've had since you last spoke. Perhaps if it's a project retrospective, you're reflecting on how the project went. And this serves to refresh your memory and establish, okay, like, what context are we coming at this with? Next up is collecting input. So you solicit feedback from all team members. Often this is done on sticky notes. There are digital formats to do retrospectives. Basically, at this point, you're just gathering all of the information on what is going well and what would we like to change. From there, as a group, you'll prioritize the topics. This is often done with a technique called dot voting, where each member of the laboratory or each member of the group has, say, 3 dots that they get to put next to a thing they want to discuss. And it becomes pretty clear very soon what is the highest priority thing for the group to be talking about at any one moment. From there, you discuss and act. So you look at your prioritization, take your highest prioritized thing, and jump in and talk about it and say, okay, so what's happened around this particular thing, and what can we do to change it? What can we act on to make this better, to change our situation? And then the last phase of a retrospective is the follow-through. So all retrospective meetings should end in actions, as well as owners of actions, to ensure that these things are actually getting done. If it's important enough for the team to talk about an item, it's really important that the things actually be completed, because what's the use of spending time reflecting on how to get better if you're not actually going to incorporate that into your lives. And ultimately, Agile retrospectives identify team improvements. So I have a little anecdote here of one of the laboratories here at the Broad. So this particular team was having trouble because the technicians were working in the laboratory hood, and they weren't able to update their digital work tracking system. So the comments heard at this meeting were things like, well, I don't have time to update Jira. By the time I've gotten to my computer, I've forgotten. Like, I don't have time to sanitize and enter my information and then jump back in the hood. It's too much of an impediment to like my process itself. And this was a problem because the project manager needed to know where things were at in order to update other members of the group on project status. And so they talked about it in this retrospective meeting, again, without blaming one another, but agreeing that this is a mutual problem. And the ultimate solution here was just to put a laptop in the hood and just dedicate a machine in that space to allow the technicians to both update their workflows, which kept the project manager happy, and it also allowed the technicians to access things like Gmail, digital protocols, Spotify, things that ultimately benefited everyone, and it was an all-around positive situation for the entire group. But this wouldn't necessarily have been talked about were it not for the forum of continuous improvement. So that's the last practice I want to talk to you about. I now want to talk a little bit about how do you start? You've heard some hopefully intriguing things today. So what do you do? I really want to emphasize that it's not that you are agile or not agile. The idea here is to be agile. It's a mindset. It's not a 100% thing. So consider what are small changes we can make within our group to foster these characteristics on our team. Because there's a lot out there that you could do, but just start with one thing. And what I've highlighted here, the retrospective, is actually what we found here at the Broad to be the most successful place to start jumping into these ideas and these practices. Because it's good to reflect. You want to reflect and say, what are our opportunities for improvement? Where could we be doing better as an organization? From there, once you identify different opportunities, start small. Pick one thing. Don't start with everything. If you jump in and say, we're going to do these 5 process changes over the next 3 weeks, it's going to be really overwhelming for your group. So start small and introduce these ideas slowly. From there, iterate and experiment. Say you're interested in trying out a daily stand-up. Try one like once a week. Do that for 2 or 3 weeks and then check in. Hey team, how is this going? How are you feeling about this cadence? And perhaps then you want to check in again, or you want to increase the frequency of that meeting, or not. But the important thing is that you're talking about it and that you're iterating on the things that you try. From there, just repeat the cycle and see where your decisions and your ideas take you. Because little by little, a little becomes a lot. And that's really what we found in a lot of the laboratories here at the Broad in trying out some of these Agile practices is that starting with a small idea of challenging yourselves on how to do better and how you can continue to improve can offer a lot of feedback and a lot of ways that can really benefit the group as a whole. So with that, I'd love to leave you with a few future learning resources. So if any of this information sounded intriguing today, I would love for you to join us at our monthly Agile Academia affinity group meetings. I'll have a notepad down here if you want to write down your contact info, and I can add you to that. As well as another deliverable for this, for my master's project, was that I wrote an Agile Laboratory Handbook. It's about 20 pages, and it goes into the 6 tools and techniques that I told you about today, but in a little more detail, as well as like variations on things. And so that is actually available on Amazon, because self-publishing is a thing now. But I would love to send you a copy of the PDF if you have any interest in that. And if you have any questions or anything, I will take them now after I give my acknowledgments. But feel free to email me, kwest at Broad Institute, kwest like Kanye, it's easy to remember. So with that, finally, I'd like to acknowledge some people that I could not have done this project without. First and foremost are Didi Vaz and my Tufts advisor, Partha Ghosh, who have been just instrumental in guiding me along the way. My colleagues on the Agile Academia Steering Committee, thank you for your help in orchestrating a lot of these ideas with the larger group. And then finally, an immense thank you to Pardeep Subedi, Sarah Winicky, and the entire Subedi Laboratory for allowing me to do some social experiments amongst the team and really explore how these Agile practices can be carried out. So with that, I'd love to open it up for any questions if anyone has any. And thank you all for coming today. Ooh. Any ideas? Yeah.
So I have a question. So before I came to, do I talk into this? Oh. Before I came to Broad, I worked in primary care in a health system, and we got really into process improvement and this. And what tended to happen, I could always tell 5S had struck, because every group had maybe organized their exam rooms, had definitely organized the lunchroom, and then nothing else happened. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, have you seen examples here like that? It's interesting to me that you would start with the retrospective and that really gets traction at Broad, and that makes a lot of sense to me. But have you seen other organizations where, or even at Broad, where they start with that 5S and then somehow then it doesn't go anywhere? If there's anything you'd recommend.
I mean, you can think about all these things as, so every team is a different organism, and like every tool is going to affect that team in a different way. And there are some cases where like maybe a group 5S's their workspace, and it ends at that. But if that's helped the group, no harm done in a way. And that's why we've enjoyed starting with the retrospective meeting, because you can identify opportunities for improvement, but you have also established a forum for improvement and a place to check back in and say, hey, we 5S'd our entire lab. How did that go? Do we like that? Anything we would change? And just opening that conversation and just asking the question of, did this thing we did actually help us? Really can offer some momentum forward as far as like, yeah, and maybe we should try other things. But as far as tactics or processes being adopted and then forgotten per se, I would argue that it's still been a great benefit for the team, and a little by little becomes a lot. So it won't happen overnight, but it's better than nothing. Any other questions? Thanks, Kate. Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest impediments at the Broad for people succeeding with becoming more agile, be it tools or support from leadership or deadlines or whatever it might be? Mm-hmm. What do you think are the biggest impediments for people?
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg. So I think, the Broad is an academic research institution, and so Greg works at me with DSP, and DSP is kind of a special exception in thinking about Agile practices because Agile software development is so prevalent in the field. As far as other groups, I think there are a couple factors that prevent a really strong uptake in things. There's one, just not knowing what the heck Agile is and what these words mean, because there's definitely a learning curve when you have things like Scrum Master. Like, if I asked my peers in the lab to start, like, yeah, I'm going to go be a Scrum Master, they're like, what are you talking about? So these ideas just aren't as easily accessible if you don't come from the software background. There are definitely factors, I suspect, as far as finance as well. Laboratories have grants to spend on research. They don't have grants to spend necessarily on process organization or on spending time to think about those aspects of things, because historically science has been so much like results, deliverables, high quality research, write the paper, get it out. But I would argue that these practices allow you to reflect on things that you might not have thought about otherwise that can also accelerate your research cycle. So you're looking at how can I align my team a little differently to get my results faster while not having to spend more grant money, while publishing on a faster turnaround, et cetera. So I think funding is a thing, and I think part of that too is buy-in from leadership. Again, these practices are not well known, so I suspect were you to go to a lot of PIs around the Broad and say, like, let's be agile, they'd be like, what are you talking about? How's your paper going? So I think it's just a matter of really presenting this information in an accessible way to demonstrate the value of what could be gained by trying out some of these techniques. So we're working on it. And it's been interesting. That's been a cool thing to watch in the Agile Academia Affinity Group as people continue to attend and they continue to learn things and talk a little bit about what they're trying with their groups. So I hope the ideas are catching. I see immense applications here, but I think it's just a matter of time. And like I said, I do think Broad is in a place to lead the way in this aspect, in that a lot of other institutions look to us for great science, and I think they should be looking at us for how to structure great science as well. So, thanks. Good question. Any others?
I just had more of a comment than a question. Coming from the software world and other organizations, there are people that actually would turn away from Agile because there's so many different sort of software development processes out there, and maybe they've experienced it where it's not been implemented in a very productive way, but becomes more of a burden instead of it actually being helpful for the team. And I think that showing that it's not just for software development, but that it can be used beyond that might bring more credibility back to teams who are traditionally saying that's too much process and too much burden, we don't need it, to actually see that it's going beyond software. Mm-hmm. So I think it's great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely focusing on the why is very important in these.
Yeah, I guess I do have a question. I think we've touched on it in various ways, but I'm wondering, I mean, the Broad is an academic research institution, but I think a lot of pure academic institutions might take exception with that. And have you thought about how to generalize this in the even, more basic research lab operations? I feel like as much as we may benefit from it in labs at the Broad, there's even more pushback and less culture around process optimization and manage. I mean, this isn't even just about Agile. This is about any process, any management, in academic research labs. And just wondering how to instill a culture where there's receptivity to that concept at all, let alone getting into the kind of more hardcore Agile, approach specifically.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I was hoping to do with this handbook I've written. It's pretty straightforward, it's pretty accessible. I've already sent that a few places online and shared it around. And I've not only, so I've done this presentation as part of my deliverable, but I've also presented last August at a National Agile conference and introduced the idea of these practices in those settings there. And I've gotten a surprising amount of people reaching out through that, which I'm hoping to pursue in order to get the information out to different universities. So there's a department at Northwestern focused on organizational transformations, specifically in different spaces. And so I'm talking with someone there about her project on Agile and non-software spaces. Somebody from the University of Alabama reached out about things. So I think, again, it's sharing the ideas and starting to have people think about how they can structure academics differently. And that's not going to be a quick thing by any means. I mean, you know better than anyone, Bronwyn. But just in thinking about, I'm hoping to take this information to other academic publications as well, looking at an editorial in Nature or something of that sort, perhaps going to a few academic conferences and just getting the ideas out there, because none of this stuff is too complicated. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of actually applying those concepts and carrying things out. So I don't think it'll be fast, but I've got a couple different ideas, and actually I'd welcome some feedback if you have any ideas on where to take this next.
And one more quick question. Are you more generally targeting like a bottom-up versus a top-down approach, as in a leadership-driven implementation versus like an organic kind of grassroots, bring this to our labs? Or is it trying to attack on both sides?
Yeah, so I think this is definitely an attack on both ends. I think that appealing to leadership is really beneficial in having success with these ideas. I know I talked to someone in a group who they do secret retrospective meetings because their leadership isn't bought in, but they're still able to benefit from that and to learn. So it can come from either direction. I do think there's more success when leadership is bought in, and so I'm hoping in getting these ideas out there a little wider that folks can keep an open mind on that. I think too, it's really important to tackle it from the bottom up as well, because the research associates of today are the PIs of 15, 20 years from now, 10, 5. But so exposure earlier to these ideas is also beneficial in that, say, Aaron, when he goes off to his next grand adventure, can say, hey, we did this thing about a stand-up, and introduce those ideas to his new colleagues. So, question. Any other questions? Awesome. Oh, wait, one more.
More of a hypothesis than a question, but you were talking about implementing, and I thought of it when she was talking about maybe a bottom-up grassroots thing. These, some of the things that you've suggested, stand-ups every day or retrospectives, or bringing them in one thing at a time, or adopting them one thing at a time, it seems to me that they work like dominoes, and that if you do one, it pushes over another, and it can grow in that way.
Definitely. And actually, we've seen that here at the Broad. One group started with the retrospective. From there, decided they wanted to try out stand-ups. From there, decided they wanted to try out a visual workboard to go alongside their stand-up. So all of these tools definitely complement each other. I think it's just part of that is introducing them in a non-threatening manner. Again, none of this stuff should add work to your team. It should enhance them and serve to help them. So yeah, they definitely domino effect for sure. Awesome. Any other questions? Amazing. Thank you all so much for joining me today. It's been really fun to talk about this. Again, if you're interested in joining the Agile Academia group, I'll have a paper notepad down here, and love to hear your thoughts or feedback on my presentation. So thanks, everybody.